I'm back, bitches! Alright, my darlings, and happy Halloween! Yeah, I may live in a country that doesn't really care about this holiday, but hey, that doesn't mean I can't celebrate it, right? Ah, Halloween. A time when all the ghosts, goblins, and psychopathic killers wearing William Shatner masks come out to play. Whether you love it or you hate it, Halloween is still one of the most prolific and persistent holidays in the Western calendar, alongside Christmas and New Year's. And funnily enough, all three are holidays where you spend it with sweets, toys, and funny costumes as a kid. And then when you're an adult, you spend it with alcohol, slutty outfits, and an unwanted pregnancy 1 month down the line. Now, there are many ways that people celebrate the most evil time of the year, besides Valentine's, that is, but I personally love to watch old Halloween specials that I saw as a kid. The Scooby-Doo direct-to-video movies, the Halloween Tree, the Dick and Dom Halloween episodes, and tons of others like that. But those kind of things have been reviewed to death, so I'm not going to be looking over those today. Instead, I'm going to be taking us back to a time in our youth, the times that weren't supposed to be scary, and yet somehow ended up being scary. As a kid, you have a limited understanding about the world around you, and you're a lot more emotionally unstable, so that means that things that are made in a certain way that you don't fully understand can make you react in ways they weren't supposed to. Like how an episode of Looney Tunes can make you feel weird because you've never seen a rabbit or a duck move the way Daffy and Bugs do, or an old episode of an anime can give you a seizure or make you feel sick. But the most common of these little misunderstandings for a kid is watching something that was supposed to be child-friendly, but they end up making you wet yourself. And some of them are still quite scary even today, whether through memory of them or just because they were going a bit too over the top with what they were trying to portray in the first place. So today I'm going to go over the top 10 of these really freaky and just inexplicably bizarre kids show moments. Now, this may be an odd list for some, because if you're about over 25 years old, you may be wondering why I'm putting some of these shows on the list, because you've probably had no experience with them. And those that even had experience with them will probably think why I'm putting them on the list anyway. But this is a personal choice of me of why I put them on the list, and I'm sure that some of you at home have had your experiences with these shows in a similar way too. But if not, well, sit yourselves down and waterproof that sofa. This is the top 10 unintentionally scary kids shows. Number 10. Teletubbies. And I can hear about 100 or so people just clicking off of my video just from the mention of that name. Yeah, I know, you're all going, Teletubbies? Really, George? You're scared of this frontal lobotomy of kids' entertainment? And while yes, it's true that Teletubbies did little more than kill a few children's brain cells back in the 90s and early 2000s, and I guess for those who have watched the reboot series too, but I've not seen it, so it could be better for all I know. A lot of people don't remember that the lack of actual dialogue, bizarre choices of vocal mannerisms, weird set design, and just insane things that happened on screen created this kind of eerie mood and atmosphere to the whole thing. It felt less like a kids show and more like something that they would show in a chemical treatment facility to placate the near brain dead patients. And I had to grow up with a chemical imbalance in my head all the time as a kid due to being autistic, so you can imagine how much more freaky this show was to me. Simply put, you know when you take too much ganja and you feel like you're in a bubble? That's how it felt like watching this show every day to me as a kid. So due to this, that meant that some of the more odd and erratic parts of the show could freak me and some of my other non-chemically impaired friends out. Most people get a little freaked out when they see the Nunu for the first time, and of course there's this infamous scene. And of course the infamous Sun Baby.
Oh my god! What the fuck?
And I guess if you live in Bible Belt America, you can think that Tinky Winky's a bit scary because people believed he promoted homosexuality. No, I'm not joking, that was actually a thing, look it up. But to me, the freakiest and most inexplicably horrifying moment came from the puppet in the house routine. Occasionally, Teletubbies would have what they called magic events, where random objects would appear in Teletubby Land and entertain the Teletubbies. These would often be very odd and not make a lot of sense, such as 3 ships sailing by, but not on Christmas Day, and a herd of random animals to the tune of 2x2, but some of these would be really disturbing at times, such as the cardboard cutout chase sketch of the bear and the lion due to the erratic movements and the creepy voices.
I'm the bear, and I'm coming!
And the CGI bear with the unmoving face tap dancing around the magic roundabout. No, not that one! But by far the scariest of all, at least to me, was the puppet dancing through the house. Words really can't do this segment justice, so here you are in all its terrifying glory. I am gonna need a lot of booze to get to sleep tonight. Seriously, look at this! That voice is horrifying enough to the point where it sounds like a demented minion from Despicable Me, and the weird choice of Foley for the sound of him going up and down the stairs is bizarrely creepy too. It sounds like what should be played when Nosferatu ascends the stairs. But those eyes are the worst part of all. Eyes were always creepy in the Teletubbies, and the bear and the lion was probably worse in that regard, but at least they didn't look this terrifying, not helped by how we keep zooming in on the thing.
Don't go any closer, it will steal our souls!
This thing was the bane of my nightmares when I was a little kid, and probably the progenitor for my first real nightmares, which is why this gets the spot of number 10. Though I'm still juggling on whether or not to swap it with the bear and the lion. Has anyone really watched that scene recently? Any animal that can make the clouds move by just roaring really poorly is creepy in my book.
God! What?
Son, baby!
Are you crazy yet?
The clouds will not defeat me!
Number 9. Grisly Tales for Gruesome Kids. This one's quite low on the list because, as the title implies, it's supposed to be scary. But I don't think they achieved the goal that they meant to in the way they quite planned to. For those who don't remember this show, it was basically an animated kid-friendly version of shows like Tales from the Crypt and The Twilight Zone, with each episode being its own self-contained horror story, narrated by Nigel Planer of The Young Ones fame nonetheless, and was considered the spiritual successor to another CITV show, Wolves, Witches and Giants. Now, as you expect with a show like this, it's kind of meant to be a bit frightening, right? But unlike shows such as Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps, this show wasn't really fun scary, but more brown boxes scary, in that it was rather disturbing. Essentially put, it's got the Son of the Mask effect. Like, how about this story, for example? A giant man keeps growing bigger because of the boils on his tongue, and as a result demands more space in a creepy lisp, and eventually grows to the size of the planet, eats a satellite that pops his boils, he shrinks down to the size of an ant, and gets slimed over by a snail. What? Or how about this one? A girl refuses to eat her pasta, so a ghostly figure called the Spaghetti Man shows up and chops her into fine noodles to be made into linguine. Sorry, hang on a minute, is this some kind of propaganda to teach kids a lesson? Because if that's the case, I think even Kim Jong-un would say you're going a bit too far. Even the show's equivalent of The Crypt Keeper was really creepy. I mean, I love Nigel Planer, but again, those eyes are a freak show. And I always feel that the stop motion quality of animation adds a 10 plus multiplier to the creep factor of anything. Just watch the old California Raisin specials, or the first Wallace and Gromit short. Ah, rest in peace, Peter Sallis. Though I will say that Planer does actually do a good job of delivering some one-liners every once in a while.
Children should be seen and not heard. Don't you agree, Spindleshanks?
quiet when I'm talking.
The 2D animation also has a really creepy quality to it. Everyone looks deformed, twisted, and ready to kill you at any moment. It's like walking down the street in Liverpool. Not to mention the fact that they move in such a bizarre motion and speed that makes it feel like I'm watching Sonic the Hedgehog on acid, which would explain a lot about the Sonic fanbase. Also, that theme song gives me freaky flashbacks every time I hear it, and I'm surprised that that kid in the intro kept going back to that theatre every single day, especially given the quality of the cinema snacks. Still tastes better than cinema hot dogs. I'm surprised this show actually lasted for as long as it did, or that it didn't get as many complaints, because even in my teen years I felt freaked out by this show. I can only imagine how traumatised an even younger kid who flicked onto it accidentally might have felt. This show may have been intended to scare kids, but sometimes you can do that in the wrong way. The Real Ghostbusters is a testament to how you can make something that's meant to be scary for kids and also make it fun for kids. This can be put more into the disturbingly scary category, and also a kind of weird brow-bashing way of making kids listen to their parents. Though I will say that it is really hard to stop watching it just out of pure fascination. Plus, I'll watch anything that's got the old Young Ones cast in it.
It's a vampire! In a parcel! In the kitchen! Hate mail.
Number 8. SpongeBob SquarePants, and those who are still here after the Teletubbies entry have probably gone by now. SpongeBob is a great show, or at least it was until Nickelodeon carved out its soul, turned it into a zombie and forced it to go on well beyond what it should have been, but the early episodes were a lot of fun. However, with the surreal humour the show was known for, it was an occasional possibility that it would cross the line from surreal and into straight up disturbing, such as with the Splinter episode. However, the greatest example of this, at least to me, was in the Butterfly episode. Imagine yourself a little kid. You're just watching a fun little episode about a sea sponge and star playing with the most beautiful animal in the world, when suddenly... It's freaking horrifying, isn't it? I don't know whose idea it was to show a close-up of a butterfly's disgusting compound eyes with the sound of a buzzing fly, a sound that butterflies don't even make, but they clearly wanted to freak some people out with this stuff, and what's worse is that the other characters spend the rest of the episode as frightened as we are. I don't know what's worse in this scenario, to see these beloved characters being terrified by a bug, or to know that I'm just as cowardly as a creature that eats its own spine and brain when it's born. There's not much to say on this one, but I don't really think there needs to be. Scary bug, anyone can instantly understand that. Done. Number 7. Jungle Run. Jungle Run was an amazing kids' TV show, or at least that's what I say. Those who grew up with Legend of the Hidden Temple will probably argue otherwise, but for its time it was really clever and innovative. The basic premise is that a bunch of kids go into a fake jungle setting and play a bunch of games in various scenarios to collect monkey statues. They would often involve things like crawling through a maze, firing coconuts, building a bridge, swinging on vines to collect baskets. It was really cool. The show in its infancy was very bare bones, hosted by then relative newcomer at the time, Dominic Wood, but it wasn't until the second host in the third series where it really got into its flow, upping the sets to look more lavish and realistic, and making the most unique element of the game even more terrifying: getting trapped. Some of these games, as you've probably noticed by the clips, can be quite dangerous for a kid, and to up the incentive they gave a little extra dose of reality by, if you didn't get out of some of them in time, you would get trapped, much like a real explorer, Indiana Jones style. But this all came to a head with the ultimate challenge of Jungle Run: the Temple of the Jungle King. The statues the team would assemble would award them a little extra time in the temple, which would allow them more ability to get the best prizes, as each room in the temple had ascending prize statues: rock, bronze, silver, and the golden monkey statue, and each room would have a puzzle that needed to be solved in order to move on to the next one. However, the teams would only have a limited amount of time to solve all the puzzles, and if they didn't withdraw out of the temple in time... It's still really suspenseful to watch even now, and it's made even more scary by the fact that if you look in the background of some episodes, you can see what look like skeletons, which I interpret as being the remains of the teams that didn't make it out of there. How scary is that to think of? The temple itself even looks a bit scary. I mean, look at that thing. It's the result of what Donald Trump would probably look like at the end of his term as president, running off into the jungle in disgrace, going mad, and he's assuming that he's the king of the jungle out of desperation. In fact, maybe that is who made this temple, and this is all taking place in the future. But the risk was always worth it for getting those great tiny prizes that they somehow managed to fit into these small statues, though a Game Boy Advance and a portable DVD player is definitely not to be sniffed at. Though if you do manage to get trapped inside, it's not going to be much solace at that point, especially when one of your teammates decides to eat you all to survive. Come on, I can't be the only one who thinks that's how it would happen. I mean, hell, how do you think the skeletons got down to the bone in only 1 week? Though I suppose we never did see a crazed former teammate jump out of the new team ready to eat them. That would have been awesome. Though I did always wonder, why didn't the host just stick a bone or something in the doorway to stop it from shutting down? That guy must have been a real sadist. Raven from the BBC also came close for a similar gimmick, but that was clearer that it was a pure fantasy and fictionalised, and more theatrical than Jungle Run, so it wasn't quite as scary, though that main guy was pretty creepy.
Therefore this challenge is yours alone to face. Take courage, my young friend. Perhaps today, you will join the select band of warriors who have succeeded in this challenge and found glory.
It may only be a game show, but this may be the scariest way to end a game show outside Japan, and those 2 giant apes that followed the guys around all the time didn't exactly help out the creep factor. Talk about hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. Number 6. Zap! Yet another show that wasn't supposed to be scary, but through a combination of direction and tone, it just is. Zap was a kids' variety sketch show that was inspired by classic British comic strips such as Dennis the Menace, Desperate Dan, Minnie the Minx, Bash Street Kids, and so on and so on. So it has a distinct comic book style. However, to make something feel really like a comic book, you really have to go the extra effort, much like the Marvel movies do. And Zap sadly didn't have the necessary means to make itself look like a comic book from the cinematography alone, so they compensated with in-your-face Batman-style text effects, obnoxious music, and the reason why we're here, dubbed-in pantomime-style dialogue. Well, I say dialogue, more like a bunch of scat and verbalising, and it was absolutely terrifying. The tone the show created was very similar to Teletubbies in that it felt like you'd just taken some bad acid and you were having the worst trip of your life. The ridiculous deadpan delivery and the horrifying dubbed sound effects made it feel like you were being strapped to a chair and forced to watch a bunch of psychopaths having a mental breakdown. It's basically the kid equivalent of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre dinner sequence. Never come near my house or my TV screen again, you freaks. Especially you with the yellow clothes and pigtails. And don't even get me started on those handyman magic hacks. Disembodied body parts are creepy enough, I'll get into that in the next entry, but being covered in neon tights and moving around all wispy and speedy like just makes it feel unnatural. And I get that it's supposed to be, but there's a difference between enchanting and charming unnatural and freaky unnatural. Either way, I think I'd rather sit through a bunch of comics of Be the Menace than have to sit through this rubbish again. Still makes me feel uneasy. Number 5. Art Attack. Art Attack was a great art and craft show and one of my biggest inspirations as an artist and a prop designer. While I was a bit more of a fan of CBBC's Smart, Art Attack, hosted by Neil Buchanan, was a great source of creativity and charm that encouraged kids to give it a go themselves. However, there was always one person, or rather a part of a person, that made me afraid to watch this show. Ladies and gentlemen and other walks of life according to Tumblr, I present to you the horror of the head.
Oh, what a lovely, tranquil, big art attack, eh? I've had some great holidays like that. Chugging through the beautiful countryside aboard a
This thing is terrifying! It originally started off as a cheap effect of a guy under the table a la Reanimator, but it turned into a hideous, uncanny valley nightmare fuel. And yes, I'm aware of the infamous sex message scandal where people claim that the head's fringe spells out sex, but quite honestly, I'm surprised anyone could notice that given that he moves so erratically like he's having a seizure that I couldn't get a clear shot of him for long enough to even see it. I keep thinking he's going to try and launch himself off that perch and try and eat me every time he moves. That, and I was too busy wetting myself to even listen to what he was saying. The head is the epitome of things that should be charming but end up terrifying you, and the voice he has, along with his child molester face, makes it all the worse. I was genuinely too scared to watch this great show for art tips because I didn't want to see the head, hence why I watched Smart more. Then again, that show's much harder to watch on reflection given what ended up happening to one of the main hosts. I don't even have a joke, it's just really sad. But regardless, this thing is the reason why I'm scared of disembodied body parts that are alive. Heads in particular, they freaked me out all my life, and this horrifying creature with the Magaluf-style complexion is to blame. Curse you, head! Number 4. Animals of Farling Wood. You all knew I was going to mention this. I've mentioned it about 3 times in a row in my videos so far, so let's just waste no time and show that clip of the baby mice being impaled again. How can you get away with that on TV? That is so wrong. Number 3. Horrible Histories. No, I don't mean that awesome CBBC version that you could argue was the last great thing CBBC ever did, or at least was the last show I watched on the channel before I stopped watching it altogether. No, but I mean the original CITV version, made in Canada of all places. Yes, not a lot of people know this, but before the beloved award-winning CBBC adaptation of the books, there was a short-lived animated adaptation involving 2 modern-day teenagers, one who looks a bit like Brock from Pokemon and the other one looking a bit like Joan Rivers, would go back to various points in history to learn about how awful things were in the past, and learn how to make things better in the present, or just to appreciate what they have in the present. So basically it's the animated TV equivalent of an old person going, "I would have been lucky to have that in my day, you ungrateful little shits." The show was pretty much buried after it was finished, and pretty much nobody remembers it, despite some pretty high profile voice actors like Billy West, Cree Summers and Jess Harnell doing the voices. But I'll always remember the show for one specific moment that shook me to my very core as a kid. As you may have noticed, the animation is really bizarre. I'd compare it to the style of shows like Pit and Cantrop and Watch My Chops, but those series had much better motion to it. This is not only really stiff and has barely any motion to it, it's just not pleasant to look at. It looks like the result of some kid's doodles in history class and just might rival the adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, Hammerman and 12-Ounce Mouse as the worst animation ever put on television. As a result, some of the darker elements to the show would occasionally come off as much scarier than intended. Now, the book series of Horrible Histories has been infamously dark due to not shirking away from some of the darker elements of history, hence the name. However, you do have to do a little bit of sugarcoating for the kids. You needn't lie or cover up the truth, you just need to make it seem a lot less dark and horrific, which the CBBC live-action version did to great effect with its Monty Python-style sketches and upbeat humour, to the point where it made even Hitler seem funny.
Talk to the hand, 'cause the face ain't listening.
However, in the Tudors episodes, the teens are assisting John Harrington, the inventor of the first flushing toilet, present his magnum opus to the Queen. But before he does so, she threatens that if the president's not up to her standards, she'll, well, do what Queen Elizabeth I was well known for.
Truly, it is within the royal personage to forgive one's transgressions. But be warned, godson Harrington, forgiveness is fleeting. If thy gift is not as grand as thou seest, your punishment will be severe, as it will be for your little attendant friends too.
I like my head exactly where it is.
Am I the only one who finds that a bit disturbing? Yes, I know it's just a melon, but as a kid, the animation was so bad, I genuinely thought it was an actual head. So as a kid, can you imagine how horrifying the image of a grey-skinned, overweight golem eating what looked like a brain was? And that's only the tip of the iceberg in the freaky and unflattering imagery in this show. There was a reason this show was forgotten, but it wasn't because it was unfunny or unrepresentative of the books. After seeing all that, you can probably guess why. A few years later, a show would come along with a similar premise and much better animation that managed to capture the joy and educational aspect of travelling back to various points in time much better. It was called the Time Warp Trio, and while it was sadly cancelled after only one season, I felt it was a very entertaining show, and well worth a look if you can find it. And of course in 2009 the CBBC Horrible History show was made, and the rest, as they say. And you can probably guess what the end of that sentence was going to be, though thankfully the first experiment with trying to bring the books to the TV screen has been gladly forgotten.
It is just like the Scouts, only evil.
Number 2. Klaxki Supo Kalski Skupo. The people who made Rugrats. Half of my audience are probably wondering who the hell this is, and the other half are probably wondering why I even put them on the list in the first place. But hear me out, as with all of these, I do have a good reason for it. KC, as I will now refer to them as, were responsible for some of the best of what were known as Nicktoons in the 90s and early 2000s, with such classics as Rugrats, The Wild Thornberrys, Duckman, and Real Monsters, and many more. And their great use of imagination, creativity, story and amazing characters have touched the hearts of many kids for years to come. However, there were some times with their odd, surreal and bizarre choices of animation and design, and occasionally dark humour would occasionally make things go over the edge in terms of kids' cartoons sometimes. Many people remember the first Rugrats movie with fond memories, as do I, but there are a lot of scenes that freaked me out in that movie as a little kid, like the maternity ward full of babies singing a rather depressing song, making references to circumcision and then making a collective urine fountain. And then of course there's the monkey scene to the tune of Rob Bagdasarian's Witch Doctor, which was an insane scene. But the part I remember the most is the scene that imitated Apocalypse Now, where Tommy snaps at his newborn brother Dill.
Everybody gets what they want.
Seriously, did anybody imagine that that would be in a Rugrats movie? The cute, charming little kid show about babies who can talk and explore the world in their own fascinating way has a scene that looks like it's right out of a Vietnam movie. Who directed this? Francis Ford Coppola? And then of course there's the previously mentioned Real Monsters, which, with a show with a title like that, you can imagine some pretty freaky imagery came out of it, and it certainly did. But every time the Grumble guy popped up, I hid behind the sofa as a kid. Even now I'm kind of still a bit freaked out by him, though that's probably because I now know that his design was based off the Dr. Frankenfurter from the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
I'm just a sweet transvestite.
Yes, I know the Nostalgia Critic's done that joke before, but it's still a good point to bring up because he was actually designed around that character, which I still don't quite understand. Why would you want to take a movie that's known for really dark sex jokes and then put an element of it into a kids show? Though I suppose we can count our blessings that they didn't do an adaptation of the Make You a Man song. And if you think I'm just being silly with what I'm talking about here, KC also made a short-lived TV series based off of Ronald McDonald of all people. I've never really been that scared of R. McD myself, but I know a lot of people grew up being so imagine him in the style of this animation, having adventures and directly trying to entertain your kids on TV. No wonder Morgan Spurlock hates McDonald's. I would if I was forced to watch this stuff when I was growing up. Now before we move on to number 1, a few honourable mentions. Thomas the Tank Engine. Does anybody find it creepy in the show how the eyes move and yet the mouths and any other elements of the faces don't? Uncle Grandpa. So incest is okay to have on a kids' TV show now. Five Nights at Freddy's. Yes, I know it's technically not a kid's property or even a TV show, but I've been seeing a lot of merchandise out in the stores recently that seems to be made to be marketed towards kids, which is wrong on all sorts of levels. And the number 1 unintentionally scary kids show is... pretty much any kids show that was shown on Channel 4. You may have noticed that a lot of the choices of the shows I've had on this list were from the channel CITV. And well, that's due to because CITV was funded by ads meant that they could stretch their legs more creatively and not have to cater to every audience like BBC did. But that meant that some of their more experimental shows would go a little bit too far and, well, some freaked audiences out. However, their stuff can be considered bedtime material compared to the stuff you would see on Channel 4 in the mornings. I've always had a permanent waking body clock, meaning that no matter what, ever since I was a kid, I always wake up at 6 AM, and that meant that there was only one channel I could watch because it was the only channel that showed kids shows that early, Channel 4. And with the exception of The Hoobs, which was a really great show, everything they showed was surreal, bizarre, and just plain terrifying. Let's get things started off with ones people are familiar with. The Magic Roundabout, a show that was the literal definition of doing an animated drug trip with the world's most off-putting theme song that made you feel like you're on a gigantic come-down. Captain Pugwash, any show that has a character called Master Mate shouldn't be shown to kids.
Master Mate, what's the difference between a cannonball and a cauliflower?
Wurzel Gummidge. I love John Pertwee, but his performance as a living scarecrow is so freaky, it gave the Scarecrow from Batman a run for its money. Imagine if you saw this on the cover of Arkham Knight. It'd be 10 times more scary.
If I had an answer, Med, I could have the pick of all the wives at once, Your Highness, sir.
The Trapdoor. As I said before, stop motion tends to have a 10 plus multiplier to the scare factor of anything. So how about a show which is literally about a big scary trapdoor with monsters underneath it? Insectors, a poor man's reboot, this show tried to be the cutting edge CGI action adventure show, but ended up just being off-putting and really weird in some places. Who comes up with a show where insect warriors fight each other with paint-spewing musical weapons? The Treacle People. I don't even know where that idea comes from, but this poor man's Wombles is just one of the most off-putting things I've ever seen in my life. It sounds more like the name to a really dodgy porn. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Here's a little montage of things that I'm sure are bound to give you some grade A nightmare fuel for tonight. Channel 4 is always about thinking of different ways to entertain the masses, and unfortunately, like a lot of experiments, they don't quite pan out the way they thought they would. However, that's still child's play to the ultimate in scary kids' cartoon characters. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you, Pob. Hey guys, it's me again. Hope you enjoyed my new video. I hope that some of these choices at least made some sense to you guys, but if you've got some better ideas of creepy cartoon moments from when you were a kid, please feel free to put them in the comment section or on the HeadphonesUK Facebook page. I've been trying a new kind of style with my videos as of late, where they're a bit snappier and faster with quicker jokes and cuts than I used to. And I hope you've been enjoying this, but you know, it's all about finding your place in the world and the kind of rhythm you have with making videos. And I'll definitely be making a lot more since I've been finished with making Deadweight now, so I've got a bit more free time on my hands. So, I hope you enjoyed my video, have a great Halloween, and I'll see you guys soon.